I want to thank you for this opportunity to address this international conference of the Fórum Brasil de Gestão Ambiental. My name is Nigel Crowell, and I'm the Chief of Section for the Local and Indigenous Knowledge Systems Program at UNESCO, based at the headquarters in Paris. And I'm going to be speaking to you about a couple of key themes, principally looking at why Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous peoples are key partners in trying to establish sustainability on the planet, but also how that needs to be blended with a strategy on human rights, on territorial governance, but also equity and financing in these partnerships. So the first thing is to say, our program at UNESCO, we've been running for more than 20 years, and we've been working with Indigenous knowledge holders as well as local communities around the world in many different environments and ecosystems. And it's become a foundation of a lot of UN policy and multilateral decision-making that these partnerships are key for everybody's survival. We sometimes think that Indigenous knowledge is only applied to a specific local area. And yes, there is a great deal of specificity there, whether it's in a rainforest context or in high altitude or small islands or open navigation, pastoralism in desert environments. But it also applies to a wider strategy of how humans can find a synchronicity between what our own needs are for economic development and the sustainability of the environment. The UNESCO Links team, for example, is hosting the technical support unit on Indigenous and local knowledge for the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And you'll know probably in 2019, IPBES released the global assessment of what it would take for in policy changes and in science mobilization to stabilize biodiversity on the planet. And one of the key recommendations was the critical role that Indigenous people and local communities play in stabilizing local ecosystems, but also even connectivity systems. We have some big decisions within the multilateral system that allow us to engage in these partnerships, that tell us that that is the direction to go. So some of these emerged out of the original UN conference on the environment that came out, environment and development, that came out of Rio de Janeiro. But those have been built on over time. So we have the Convention on Biological Diversity, which built into its regional structure the concept that Indigenous and traditional knowledge would be critical for sustainability of biodiversity, and it's the enjoyment and practice of that is guaranteed under the CBD. But the CBD's evolved further and most recently shaped by some of the other international decision-making. We now have the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which elaborates in a lot more detail the importance of Indigenous partnerships in delivering a solution to the threats to our planet. In parallel, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the work of the Intergovernmental Platform on Climate Change has also said that Indigenous knowledge, local community knowledge, is critical for our survival. And UNESCO works closely with the local communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform and the Secretariat of the UNFCCC to look at how some of these climate solutions are being proposed by Indigenous peoples, the actions they're taking. The reality is that Indigenous peoples and many rural local communities have to deal with climate change every single day. They're doing adaptation, and there's a lot of learning and teaching that we can gather from that. I've just come back from Cusco in Peru, where I was really honored to be part of a very important dialogue between REDLAC, the regional Latin America and Caribbean network of donor organizations and partners working with many different actors, government, private sector, looking at how there can be funding and finance for sustainability. At the Glasgow COP of the UNFCCC, we heard of more than $1 trillion worth of commitments to work with Indigenous peoples. The challenge now is to land that. How can investors, private sector, banking, but also state enterprises finance and support and build capacity of Indigenous peoples? The reality is that Indigenous peoples in many countries have been through a very tough period through the colonization process, sometimes through loss of territory, sometimes even degradation of languages and culture. It's been a challenging time. Now, if we're going to look at sustainability on the planet, we need that balance, the sustainability of the environment, but the sustainability of cultural diversity, of linguistic diversity, of our relationships with each other. And this is why in the Paris Agreement from COP15 of the UNFCCC, but also the Kunming-Montreal Agreement from COP15 of the UNCBD. These agreements, Paris Agreement and Kunming-Montreal, are telling us you have to join human rights and partnerships to be able to deliver. So this is not just a question of who's vulnerable, who's not vulnerable. It's a question of rethinking our relationship with climate, with biodiversity, with ecosystems, and with territories. The UN is also has launched a series of decade-long processes to try and address some of these challenges. And here again, key issues around Indigenous knowledge. We at UNESCO are leading the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainability, and we're also playing a key role in the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. For us, we see these as interwoven. Knowledge, culture, language, they all fit together, and together we can deliver some substantive changes on the planet. What's holding us back? The policy frameworks are in place, but often what's missing is that partnership, the finance side of it. So there's many pledges, but we have to land those pledges in a capacity building approach. And as in recent dialogue with Indigenous peoples, the emphasis has been on the reinforcing of Indigenous institutions, the ability to handle grant making and deliver results that are both measurable and tangible in the one sense, but also the soft skill side of community empowerment, particularly looking at gender equality, Indigenous women as leaders and knowledge holders, and the partnership between different generations in Indigenous communities. So we hope that this discussion that you're having with the Forum Brasil de Gestão Ambiental is going to bring forth some more suggestions and ideas for the Latin America, Caribbean region, but also more generally, planetarily. How can these partnerships take place? And to assure you that UNESCO and the rest of the UN system is there available to support you, to support the member states of the UN, but also to support Indigenous peoples themselves and local communities in weaving together the type of strategy, finance packages, human rights agreements, and a partnership pathway that will take us to the world that we all want to live in the coming generations. So thank you for your attention. You're also always welcome to get in touch with us at the Links program.